Video games and the equipment at one's discretion is a pairing so ubiquitous that nowadays we don't even think about it. Players over time have both had more tasks and more tools to better fit their playstyle. For all the video games I've played though, the one series that in my opinion handles its tools the best is the Resident Evil series. I'd like to think it's for a multitude of reasons, culminating in a perfect storm of design. And if you don't quite know what I mean, then stick around a while. Before we get started proper here, I just want to lay out the ground rules for how this video is going to work first. We're going to go through talking about every weapon class, pistols, shotguns, and sniper rifles, and all that other good stuff. And intermittently, I'll explain other aspects about the game that further help the overall game feel for how all these weapons work. The weapon classes in specific will also have weird examples that I do want to touch on. A lot of this footage is going to be a Resident Evil 4 remake, but if the need arises to explain a specific strange weapon in another game that I've played, then I'll be sure to mention it. No better place to start than the pistol. Simple, reliable, typically the first thing out whenever you're walking into something and you don't know what to expect. There's a reason you start every game with one of these, and the reason is because it's a safe option. Not the best, almost never the best, but a safe option. Clean up for more powerful weapons, workhorse for smaller enemies, desperate last attempt, it covers everything. A true jack of all trades, especially considering it's the most plentiful whenever it comes to ammo. You're always likely to have some ammo in your inventory, and if you don't, then odds are you will soon because of how the games are designed. Speaking realistically, most people in real life would typically have like a sidearm and ammunition for it laying around. Not everybody has a shotgun or a rifle, so it makes sense. And the pistol's ease of use and reliability makes up for it not necessarily being the best option in every circumstance. I think also because of their lower power, they also hold the record for having the highest number of weapons in its category. You can get some weird examples out of pistols like the Punisher in RE4, which is capable of piercing multiple enemies, or the Red 9, which just hits really hard, or the ever-growing number of highest capacity in the game pistols, which changes every game, basically. It's interesting to see that as you get further and further into these games, your options increase. Not only in regards to pistols, because even just Resident Evil 4 has like 5 or 6, I think, that you can choose from. But other weapons too, rifles and shotguns have more than just one option that is just a little variance in how the playstyle works. But they're there to better fit your player preference. It's interesting to see what some people consider the best version of a pistol or a shotgun, and have different answers depending on who you're asking. Having all of these traits like enemy penetration or faster firing rate or more capacity or other unique small stats are those little things that make every weapon feel unique from each other, which is one of the reasons why I think Resident Evil handles its weapons so well. The amount of variety and character almost with every individual weapon. Probably the best panic button in the game, the shotgun sits pretty comfortably in most people's inventories. It has a decent amount of ammo for it, but never enough to just main, and the rest of the weapons going forward will be just like that, if not more stringent, because it's a survival horror game, why wouldn't it do that? Having both good stopping power and firepower means that if it doesn't kill something outright, it'll at least get it out of your face. Shotguns in video games, pretty much in general, need to feel satisfying in order to actually understand the weight of their power. This was evident even as early as like Doom, for example, and has continued to sort of stay within video games as a whole. Resident Evil, of course, is no slouch to this. If you want to feel better immediately, just blast it in the face with a shotgun. It's probably not going to give you any trouble afterwards. Notable weapons in this category are kind of few and far between. You have various ones for higher ammo capacity, smaller inventory size, faster fire rates, more power in exchange for any of those past three. At the end of the day, you can't go wrong with a good shotgun. In Resident Evil 4, the Skull Shaker, which I'm pretty sure is a Digital Deluxe exclusive, boasts the absolute smallest size for the widest spread out of any shotgun. This can be a good or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. I personally like to just hit as many things as I can if I'm hitting it with a shotgun, and if it's one big target in my face anyway, then it's going to just take all the pellets. Similarly, the Striker in Resident Evil 4, especially the original, had an interesting glitch associated with it that is well known for speedrunners called the Dipman glitch, which increased your animation speed. It was a big enough deal in the remake that as a reference, one of the charms you can equip is a little striker charm, and it increases your movement speed, so, you know. Let's talk about inventory size in specific for a minute, because it's kind of a not widely brought up topic whenever I hear about anybody talk about Resident Evil in general. So being that most of the Resident Evils are survival horror games, inventory plays a huge part into the resource management aspect of the games. Having a gun take not as much space can kind of be a huge help to you. Resident Evil 4 boasts the attaché case system, which is the Tetris-style puzzle piece fitting that basically makes your inventory into a minigame, and that system is wonderful. But not all the Resident Evil games had that. Instead, many of the Resident Evils boast a much more simple 8 or any other number of block structure where you put your inventory items in. Sometimes weapons can take more than one block. A lot of the times, shotguns do this. So having a shotgun take way less of the inventory, which some of the games do, again, is kind of a huge help. You can make a decision, basically, saying to yourself, do I need that extra inventory space, or can I take this higher caliber weapon? Accessories, specifically when it comes to Resident Evil 4, is also interesting because those take up their own individual inventories. And I'll touch more on those whenever we get to the SMG section. Crucially, in other Resident Evils, attachments are often counted as simply upgrades to whatever weapon you have, which means you lose the inventory space permanently if you decide to upgrade your weapon. Resident Evil 4 is not like this, and instead will let you freely equip or unequip whatever accessory you might have for a weapon. It largely doesn't matter as much as I make it out to, but the fact that it's still a mechanic means that you could potentially run into issues, and that could be your solution, opting not to take a larger piece of equipment with you or a part of that equipment that would normally make it better. The sacrifice aspect in general with Resident Evil is another aspect of not only just the wider game having a push and pull that really helps how it feels, but also specifically with just the weapons, again has to do with that personality aspect with every weapon.
Spread out.
Hang on.
This segment will be short, but there's still some nuance here. The more I think about grenades, the more I think about them being the answer for most, if not all, situations. Maybe other than the lone enemy, which can be taken out by the pistol. So, I guess in that way they're kind of opposites design-wise. The one barrier being that grenades are pretty limited, but they start showing up early game, and continue to show up as the game progresses. So they're a fair option in an emergency, all throughout your playthrough. Something else worth noting as well is that grenades typically have a really forgiving splash radius in regards to not damaging the player, but basically just enemies. Like, honestly, if you think it's going to hit you, it probably won't. And as the games progress, this limit, until you actually take damage close to its radius, gets smaller and smaller as time goes on. Notable grenades can vary depending on the game. A lot of them have weakness-specific examples, such as RE2 and I think RE3, having acid grenades and acid rounds for the grenade launcher, which deal more damage specifically to certain types of enemies. There's not anything super interesting happening with grenades, they do exactly what you think they do. Which, I mean, I guess they don't really have to do anything super special. Except for they do, or at least one does. Any Resident Evil game where you are fighting Las Plagas enemies specifically are extremely susceptible to bright flashes of light. So if you decide to use a flashbang when the parasite pops out of their head, it'll just instant kill them if it's in line of sight of them. This adds kind of a lot of value to what could be seen as the weakest grenade in other mainline RE games. And it's a neat Easter egg because it's not even mentioned in 5. 4 and 4 Remake both make slight mention of the Las Plagas light vulnerability, but in 5, it's just nowhere apparent. So imagine my surprise whenever me and my girlfriend's playthrough of RE5 resulted in me experimenting with a flashbang on an enemy with its Plaga head out, and it instantly died because I remembered that from playing OG RE4. It was a pretty pleasant surprise, all things considered. Other than that, it's kind of hard to wrap this segment up just because that's kind of the only really cool thing about grenades, but I don't know, I thought it was neat to mention because it's technically a weapon type. But other than that, let's move on. Okay, back to some regular stuff again. Rifles boast some of the highest firepower out of your normal arsenal. Second only to magnums, but we'll get there eventually. They don't show up in every game, but the ones that they do show up in typically have levels that can stretch on either vertically or horizontally, ideal for their long range. A rifle's range coupled with its firepower means that it's a pretty good option, but only in super specific instances. There's nothing saying you can't use a weapon if you're in a pinch, but it's a rifle, you can tell what the intentions are. Snipe stuff, I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. Variances in rifles can typically range from bolt-action single-shot or magazine-loading semi-automatics. Consistent rifles in Resident Evil can get kinda weird because there just aren't very many that are consistent. There's not like a well-known name that's going to appear multiple times, and they're relatively new in the scope of the IP as a whole, starting with OG Resident Evil 4 and then making their way to every game as far as I know past that point. But if a Resident Evil game gives you options, then the consistent options will be single shot or semi-automatic, so there's not much to worry about there. Now, specifically in Resident Evil 4 Remake, there is a rifle that does exist that is not a sniper rifle, which is why I didn't name this segment Sniper Rifles. I kind of wanted to add assault rifles as their own category, but there's just not enough of them in the series for me to really warrant that. So it's going here just as a side. Assault rifles can either couple into an existing weapon category, or they can be their own category with their own ammo types. Another reason I don't put assault rifles in their own category is because depending on the game, the intended use case for them can vary depending on what the game is trying to achieve. For instance, the remake of Resident Evil 3 has an assault rifle with its own ammo as far as I can tell, but it's reserved only for easy mode, so I've seen exactly zero use of it because I haven't humored it, although it would be funny to just kind of sneeze through the game one day and see if maybe it has its own applications there. However, the assault rifle in Resident Evil 4 uses the sniper rifle ammo type, so it's coupled with rifles as a whole. And it's also a pretty funny exception to all the sniper rifle rules for the most part. Instead of being semi-automatic for a sniper rifle, it's fully automatic, as you could tell, and if you have the ammo for it, it just shreds whatever it comes across. So if you're somebody who doesn't exactly prioritize accuracy, you can almost think of the assault rifle as another Magnum, if you want to forego delicate shooting in its entirety. Looping back around to more traditional rifles, proper sniper rifles excel at weak points specifically. It could be stat-wise or in-game wise, how it might have like a multiplier for its critical hit chance or something, but honestly, it's likely just due to how that weapon is treated, and the same can go for its ammo. There's not a lot of that lying around, but there is enough to make a difference whenever it comes to doming specific problem enemies. An understated problem for the rifle is also the fact that it needs to have the proper opportunity to be able to be used. It's not a panic tool. You can't necessarily use it like a shotgun, although you could, again, in an emergency. But if something's in your face, would you rather use a sniper rifle or a shotgun to take care of it? Such is the balance for a weapon like that. I don't know why I'm having issues coming up with things to talk about for the rifle of all things, but I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. So this category is going to be more or less a catch-all for anything that can't be put in its own category. Without beating around the bush too much, it's things like the bolt thrower in RE4 Make, or the mine thrower as it was known in OG Resident Evil 4. Other weapons too, such as the spark shot in Resident Evil 2 Remake, which for some reason I couldn't remember the name of and had to find it, which took longer than it should have for some reason. Obviously, specific examples would be kind of hard to mention just because depending on the game, they have very specific use cases. So while I won't mention any more specific miscellaneous weapons, I will say that there is good reason to go back and play the other games simply because they won't show up in every game that you're playing. Basically, they're unique enough on their own to want to see if you feel even remotely the same as I do about how these weapons work in these games. They can cover specific enemy weaknesses, or cover a part of your arsenal that might be lacking. I felt the need to bring up this section in specific, simply because there's a lot of weapons in Resident Evil and a lot of them are unique. Don't exactly fit any one mold necessarily. Interestingly, opinions can vary pretty widely on how these weird weapons work. Not everybody likes the spark shot, and that's fair. Some people don't touch the bolt thrower even if you put mines on it. So I guess uniquely, it's the most wishy-washy of all the weapon categories. But do you know what everybody likes? The go-to option for whenever you need a boss dead right now. Magnums boast the highest firepower out of any weapon in your arsenal. As a result, they also are the most stringent on ammo. Magnum ammo that you find are sometimes considered a bonus or a treasure. That is to say that you have to do something special to sometimes even get any. Of course, that depends on the game, but largely speaking, there's a good reason why you don't have a lot of ammo lying around. Starting with Resident Evil 1, the Derringer is probably the most noteworthy example of a Magnum, simply because instead of finding any ammo for it, you only start with the 1 or 2 shots in the gun itself. It largely plays the same role as any Magnum. You can't find any ammo for for it, therefore it one-shots things, and this is true for any enemy you can come across in RE1. Going forward through the series, you would be able to find and or craft ammo for any other magnums. Now obviously, with all that being said, this isn't a weapon you can just whip out and fire at any random enemy. The stringency and firepower of this weapon means that it warrants careful planning for its typical application, of which should be anytime you're fighting a boss. I say should be because there is at least one game that requires you to fight regular enemies with the Magnum, and that's the remake of Resident Evil 3. I don't know if the original is like that, but nonetheless, that's the case in the remake. And I don't personally like that so much, but that could just be me. I never in my life have otherwise used a Magnum for any regular enemy. Side note before I forget about it, every RE game except for the remake of Resident Evil 4, anytime you get to upgrade the ammo capacity for a Magnum, for any gun really, it'll give you a free complete reload for the gun. You can end up saving a lot of ammo if you decide to do this for a Magnum after just killing a boss and finding a shop to upgrade. I don't exactly know why the remake felt the need to take this out, but it ends up working out just fine because you do have the ability to craft Magnum ammo if the game just ends up not giving you any. And of course, hard difficulties might warrant you to use the Magnum more often than just during boss fights, but when it comes to saying all that, I'm not super familiar with the hardest difficulties of the Resident Evil games, so I could be wrong. Notable weapons in this category also gets kinda repeaty, because the miscellaneous weapons also had the same answer. Every Magnum is unique, essentially. You're lucky to find more than 2 in any game that you're playing where they show up in, which, to my knowledge, is all of them. There's at least 1 Magnum. The options you have for Magnums are things like more damage for less ammo, or more ammo for less damage. At least that's the case in Resident Evil 4, as well as one other gun in RE4, both the remake and the original that I'm saving for later because its rules are completely different, but you know. I kind of find it funny that the most noteworthy thing about different Magnums is that there is more than one. It kind of goes to show you just how capable these weapons are. In the same vein, that doesn't make them particularly unique. I find that the Killer 7 in Resident Evil 4 is just a de facto worse Magnum than the Broken Butterfly because of it having a lower damage. You don't need a higher ammo capacity if whatever you're attacking is going to die within the 6 shots you have for the Broken Butterfly anyway, so again, I don't see a reason in having so much. Unless you're talking about OG Resident Evil, in which case having more ammo through cheesing the ammo capacity upgrades could potentially be a good case made for it. But it's not like every day you get a revolver, so I end up just getting the Broken Butterfly anyway. And I could be super wrong about that. At the end of the day, the reason you have these other weapons is because of player preference. And that's a good enough segue for me to talk about the exclusive upgrades that every weapon has in the Resident Evil games that allow you to purchase upgrades for your guns. Speaking plainly and simply, when you have upgraded every aspect of a gun to its max, you will unlock one last upgrade for your weapon that basically turns up the strength of the weapon to 11. If you're familiar with Resident Evil 4, then you know that the Red 9 is one of the most powerful pistols in terms of raw damage. I think it is the most powerful pistol in terms of raw damage. As a result, its exclusive upgrade is to further increase its damage. Similarly, the Silver Ghost, or the starting handgun in Resident Evil 4, boasts a bonus higher crit rate, which is the chance to instantly kill an enemy if you shoot it in its weak point. And every weapon is like this too. I hate to sound like a broken record, but again, this sort of exemplifies the individual weapon personality that you have. If you like using the weapon enough, the aspect you probably like about it the most is going to get further upgrade when it's maxed out. And that's pretty cool. I think if any system in Resident Evil were to be a mainstay that isn't already, then I'm gonna say definitely probably it should be upgrades. Exclusive upgrades anyway. One other thing to mention is that exclusive upgrades warrant replayability more than just getting a better time for an S rank. If you pick up a type of weapon that you wouldn't normally give credit for, you might be pleasantly surprised at what its exclusive upgrade is. I'm not the biggest fan of the Striker in RE4, but finding that it has 100 shells in its ammo capacity is kind of crazy whenever you get it fully maxed out. I could come up with infinite examples for why I think that's really neat, but I think you can kind of get the point. I think it's a good system and it should stick around if the option of upgrading weapons is given to you in future RE games. Which, given that a rumor for RE5 remake is going to be a thing, then I hope it further exemplifies how unique the weapons can feel. What were we talking about again? Oh yeah, magnums. I've talked a little bit about how a weapon is supposed to feel in regards to shotguns and other things like that. But specifically the feeling of when you obtain a magnum and you go, oh shit, I know what this is supposed to do, is a feeling that's truly unrivaled with any other weapon I think I've ever picked up in a video game. They have almost this sacred feeling to them because of how little you get to use them. And I don't know, I just think they're really neat. So SMGs get kind of weird for me to place in terms of how they're supposed to be used, what their applications are, which doesn't mean they don't have one, it just seems like it's kind of extra in terms of what bases need to be covered for your arsenal. Sort of as a result of that, the only times you see the SMG, barring some exceptions, are the more action-centered Resident Evil games. Circling back to the use case for these guns, the best thing I can come up for them is their consistent hit stun for smaller enemies, and even some mid-sized enemies. If you're not at good range for a shotgun to just blast somebody in the face, then maybe you can pull out an SMG and get them to stop moving. Alternatively, if there are several enemies in different locations from you, you can get them to stop what they're doing if you just pop one shot into them. And maybe that's a little too technical, but at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with unloading an entire mag into an enemy or sets of enemies that are in front of you. Because, I mean, it's not like they're useless, it's just, again, there's other weapons that can do its job just kind of better, but that doesn't mean I'm not glad that they're here. Noteworthy SMGs are almost entirely a wash. There's plenty of games that only have one SMG for you to use, which just goes to show you how superfluous more than one SMG can be. See, I can't say that word. Given this reason, anytime there is an extra SMG in the roster of weapons, it's sort of just another instance of getting a feel for it and seeing if you prefer it to your other options. Since there's not really much to say on SMGs, we can move on to the crafting systems in some Resident Evil games. So crafting in RE games have been around since some of the earliest games, but they're pretty sparsely used. The games that do end up having them, though, add another layer to the options that you have for whatever weapon you want to use. Typically, when crafting ammo, the prerequisites are usually gunpowders, some of varying grades, combined with another thing in your inventory to give you the ammo type for a weapon that you want. This means, if your inventory will let you, you can basically pick and choose what ammo you want the most of for whatever gun you want to choose. And because you can't craft an infinite amount of ammo for any one weapon, that further accents the playstyle preferences of the other weapons. Handgun ammo sure is cheap to make, but maybe you prefer to have rifle ammo. If you're blasting something with the assault rifle, then why not just make as much assault rifle ammo as you possibly can? It's sort of an understated factor, but like, in terms of options for player preference, ammo goes kind of a long way with carrying that. The coolest thing to me about specifically ammo in regards to SMGs is just how much you get whenever you craft. Just picking up SMG ammo will net you an amount of ammo that's in the double digits immediately. Considering their lower than average firepower, their intention might not be to be able to kill an enemy, but instead getting them to sit still or stop whatever action they're doing, especially if it's a problem target like one carrying some sort of explosive, or one with range. And talking more about ammo, because I need to fit it somewhere, literally nobody talks about how the ammo in the Resident Evil games are color-coded. It's one of my favorite little things to be able to tell from a distance what kind of ammo you're about to pick up. Depending on what colors are chosen for which weapons, you can even get this sort of neuron brain activation thing, with stuff like the Magnum ammo being black or gray depending on what game you're playing, adding to its formidable aura for a weapon so powerful. I think if anybody wants to make a survival horror game, it also goes a long way with adding things like world building. You could add fictitious companies that sell the different types of ammos, especially if it comes to something higher caliber that doesn't get made in whatever setting that you're making. You could have antique ammo for your weaponry be a part of a de facto company that's not around anymore. The Resident Evil games don't exactly do this, but I think if you wanted to add some special world building that's not super in your face, I think it's a natural next step for this specific little element of design. All in all, though, I think SMGs probably need to be a bit better defined in RE games specifically. They're certainly unique enough on their own, but again, it's just hard for me to pinpoint why exactly I would want to pick one as opposed to another weapon. Sure enough, when given the option, it's one of the last things I select in my inventory, just because I can't think of when I would want to use one specifically. So maybe there's room to improve here, but at the end of the day, it's not like they're so bad they're unusable, just perfectly adequate. The final category we can realistically talk about is one that belongs in every Resident Evil game to my knowledge: unlockable or post-game weapons, which bend the rules of the game in its entirety. Often these weapons boast infinite ammo and a complete disregard for game balance. It's hard to really nail where else you would use these weapons other than your entire playthrough if given the opportunity to. The newer games make an effort of permanently lowering your endgame ranking if you decide to use one of these weapons. They turn the whole game into a snooze fest, basically. The survival horror game basically goes into a power trip simulator and makes for a pretty decent reward each and every time you unlock one. Going into that, each game has their own unlockable, super overpowered weapon. Many Resident Evil games have more than one, with each harder unlock requirement getting more silly than the last. Even these have a unique feel because of the amount of effort you have to put in to get them. And because, like I mentioned before, every game has a unique number of these weapons, there's not really any consistent ones that I can mention. But the sheer number of weapons that you have at your disposal in any of the games, will never not be a pleasant surprise to see what you get unlocked first. If I had to pick a couple favorites, just for the sake of mentioning some standout ones, then I had to say probably my most favorite is the Plaga removal laser in OG Resident Evil. Only some versions though, which is a little weird, but maybe even makes it more special depending on how you look at it. Also, you can't go wrong with a laser gun in a Resident Evil game. That's just ridiculous. Similarly speaking, the Albert 01 in Resident Evil 7 just makes the best noise out of any video game I've ever heard in my life, so there's that. And I think that about wraps it up for the weapons. I've talked about just about all that I could, all their applications and all the other good stuff. Honorable mention being the knives in Resident Evil. In every other game other than the remake of 4, they're kind of just the emergency attack situation, given how you have to be in uncomfortably close ranges to use it, but Resident Evil 4 Remake is special because of its parry mechanic. When I saw this first unveiled in the game trailers for it, I thought it was the dumbest shit that I've ever seen ever. And it still is, but the fact that it serves such a pivotal gameplay purpose totally redeems it for me. My initial reaction upon seeing it was definitely, oh no, what are they doing? But it ended up working, so that's good, at least. Also, I didn't mention before, but the knives in Resident Evil 4 Remake get their own exclusive upgrades, so that's really cool. Please do that more, Capcom. So we're at the end now. And as I currently stand, I still can't find any good definitive way to really show y'all why I like these weapons so much. How they work and how they accent the game feel is something that's just really hard to explain. And I'm not even sure if other people feel the way that I do about them, really. But I mean, Capcom's been doing this, at least with all the Resident Evils. But wait, what if it's not just the Resident Evils that do this? Are there other Capcom games that really nailed this facet down? Well, yes, actually. They've been doing this. Capcom has just been here making weapons crazy good feelings since their inception. I feel like I can pick just about any example from any game that Capcom has ever made, and their understanding for how equipment is supposed to feel is generally the same. It's done the best in Resident Evil, but you can go back and think of like Devil May Cry or Monster Hunter, and even though their applications are different, they still have this just pinnacle design of understanding how equipment is supposed to feel really good to use. It keeps happening. They have like some parts of the Resident Evil games even bleeding through into their other works. The starting equipment in Dragon's Dogma is the Rusted Sword and Rusted Bow, which gives you 2 status effects whenever they're upgraded to a certain level, Poison and Torpor, which were both previously not on the weapon. I would like for Dragon's Dogma 2 to do this with every weapon if it was up to me. Because in a game that would normally have it to where you get a weapon and then you get another one and it's just a straight upgrade from what you had before, that's kinda lame. I understand that works for a lot of games, but if you really like how something looks, how something feels, then maybe you want to keep it to the end. Again, based on your player preference. I'm saying that if it's an option for games to do, it should probably be taken. I'm not super familiar with it, but Okami does the same thing. Weapons go into certain categories, and within those categories, you have options for how exactly you want the weapon to feel. The background footage you're seeing now is of Onimusha, which is basically classic Resident Evil, but you're a samurai. And the different weapons in this game have their own reasons for being used. The glaive is capable of AoE, the greatsword deals a lot of damage to bigger enemies, and the katana is just good in general. It's like your pistol equivalent. They keep doing this, and I just wish everything was like that. In conclusion, I think what really makes the Resident Evil weapons work has to do partly with the game genre it's in. Every time you loose a shot into an enemy, you get a little dopamine hit of taking the enemy down. But it's other things too. The sound design, the scarcity of some of the weapons, the uniqueness and player freedom offered to you by the choices of what weapons you can pick up, the mechanical understanding of what the weapons are supposed to do. When thinking of other games to implement the same feeling I get out of Resident Evil, I think special attention needs to be taken for why you should be putting in these weapons in the first place. Why do you have multiple options for what you're picking? That's not to say something like a looter shooter or something isn't gratifying to get a specific weapon of certain rarities, but quantity versus quality is a hell of a thing. And ultimately, if your game feels fun to play, then people are going to play it. People are going to play it more than once even, which especially nowadays is getting harder and harder to do, whether that has to do with player bases getting older or what else have you. The fact that these tools work the way that they do is one of the reasons I look forward to a new Resident Evil. I know that the shooting will feel good. It has to, even in the worst case scenario. And if you're an indie dev looking for inspiration on how to make your weapons feel good, then it might be time to take some notes from Resident Evil. At the end of the day though, I might just be insane and have a fondness for these games in specific. My only evidence to the contrary is, well, I'm not the biggest fan of Resident Evil. I just happen to like a lot of the games. And that being said, I mean, let me know if y'all feel the same way. I think it'd be cool to share some stories of specific things that can only be done with these games and with the equipment that you chose, especially considering I feel we have an environment to make that happen. And with all of that being said, I think it might be time to wrap up here. I hope that through my ramblings you understand where I'm coming from a little bit, and that I'm not just insane and feel uniquely special for this one specific series for some reason. Other than that, I now have a Patreon with exactly one goal. It's a $1 goal and it gets you into a Discord, which I jump into sometimes. Maybe we can play some games or something, or I can get background footage with multiplayer and have a bunch of people on or something. I don't know. I don't usually ask for a whole lot in these videos just because I'm not expecting a whole lot from the small viewer base that I have. But with that being said, maybe drop a like and subscribe. That'd be cool. I'd like to quit my day job one day. But yeah, other than that, I hope y'all have a good one. And goodbye. Also, do yourselves a favor and look up the VP-70K in real life. It's super nerfed as the Matilda in Resident Evil. Like all of them, it's just nerfed compared to the real life counterpart.